evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome you all to the 15th inaugural lecture of University of Moratuwa. It's a great honor to have you all on this occasion today. So, now I would like to invite Professor Shantha to introduce our professor for the day.
Thank you. It's my honor to introduce our inaugural professor, Professor Fernando from the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. Professor Shantha Fernando is from Moratuwa. I say that very clearly because he was born in Moratuwa. He has his schooling in Moratuwa. He did his undergraduate work as well as an MPhil at the University of Moratuwa, and he works in Moratuwa and lives in Moratuwa. So he is very much a product of Moratuwa. He was in the first CSC batch. We joined the department in around 1987, and he graduated in 1993 with a first class honors. And he also has the distinction of being the first chartered engineering IT in Sri Lanka. Now, although he is today a professor, when he graduated, I can still remember when he was about to graduate, he came and talked with me and asked what I'm going to do after he graduate. He said, I don't want to join the academia, even if I might get a first class. I want to work in industry. I said, okay, fine. And in fact, he worked with me on email, which was a very, very new technology in Sri Lanka at that time. This was the early 1990s. And in fact, then after some time, he decided to do an MPhil on multimedia email. This was at a time when email was using dial-up and there was not even a proper internet in the country. So he was doing that for some time. Then eventually he decided, no, I'm going to reverse my previous decision and join academia, and he joined the department in 2000. And then he did his PhD at the Technical University of Delft in the Netherlands, and where he studied adaptive learning environments. But overall in his career, Professor Fernando has blended two fields, e-learning and cybersecurity. So these are two completely different fields. However, I believe Professor Fernando has very effectively blended these two to get the benefits of both. Now, when Professor Fernando joined the department in 2000, e-learning was in its infancy. In fact, at that time, we were proud that we were using PowerPoint slides and overhead and multimedia projectors. However, Shantha had the vision that the future is in e-learning, and he pioneered e-learning in University of Moratuwa in around 2002, and then introduced these best practices. So I think we are quite clear to say that at Moratuwa has been always the pioneer and the best practitioner of e-learning in this country, and then we spread this, Dr. Shantha spread this to other universities through the DEMP as well as teaching in other universities. He was also the director of the Center for IT Services for 4 years, and he ensured we got the infrastructure we needed. Many of you may not really know, okay, there is a Moodle, there is a Zoom, there is a whatever, it works. Right? When things work, we don't realize the amount of effort. I know how many times Dr. Shantha went to the Vice Chancellor and fought with the Vice Chancellor and argued with the Vice Chancellor. I need this, I need this. I need 20 million or 40 million or whatever the amount was. And he got it. And did he take it home? No. The university got it, and we are still using that today. We can thank Shantha for ensuring that Moratuwa was ready to handle COVID-19. As you know, in early 2020, when suddenly we heard this COVID thing, many places had no idea what to do. No idea. University of Moratuwa actually had a good idea what to do because we have been practicing e-learning for a long time. We had the infrastructure, we had the Zoom, we had the online learning platform, Moodle. And I could clearly say that even in April 2020, when COVID just started and we had no idea what was happening, we still managed. In fact, I can remember when I was teaching, I just continued my lectures week by week without a single break. Why? Because all the facilities were there and there was nothing extra to do. And you can judge this success by the fact that today, students are demanding that courses be online. In fact, if you try to go and walk into a room and do a lecture, students will say, sir, can you put this online because I want to access it from home? Like, can you send this assignment online rather than on a piece of paper? So I think that is the success when you do something and people demand that it be continued, that means you have succeeded. Also, he was a pioneer in cybersecurity. First, in the early 1990s, when the first internet service provider was set up, Dr. Shantha helped the ISPs not only to set up their networks but also to secure their networks. And then in the early 2000s, when Sri Lanka was just entering this information age. And in addition to helping many organizations, both in the private and public sectors, to develop and secure their networks, he worked on forming both the National Computer Security Organization, SLCERT, as well as TechCERT, which is the premier independent managed security services center in the country. And we can safely say that Prof. Shantha's work has saved our country many, many millions of rupees by the attacks it has prevented. So we don't know, right? As a general public, we often have no idea whatever attacks were prevented due to the pioneering work of Prof. Shantha Fernando. So I can say a lot more about Prof. Shantha, including his teaching, research, university and national service, but I think I have mentioned enough for you to realize who he is. So therefore, I will stop now and invite him to the podium.
Thank you, Professor Das, for the kind introduction. So in fact, I was his student. In fact, I'm glad to be one of his students. So he has inspired me, and he knows about me, and then therefore, I think he gave an introduction without any help from me because he could remember what I was doing. So I was attached to the Department of Computer Science and Engineering as a student of the very first computer engineering batch, and I think I am privileged to be one of his students. Okay, before I start this session, I would like to dedicate this session to a few people. One is Professor Inaugural, who was the founding head of our Department of Computer Science and Engineering. He was a role model, and in fact, his pioneering work motivated me to do various things that I'm doing today. So thanks to Professor Inaugural. Then Professor Gihandas, who introduced me today. So he just joined our department when I was in the final year. And then, in fact, when we went third year. And then, of course, he had some pioneering efforts in bringing internet to Sri Lanka. In fact, both Professor Gihandas and Professor Inaugural, they have been awarded with the Internet Hall of Fame. So you can see the amount of work that they have done. Then I would like to dedicate this to one of our former vice chancellors, Professor Vijay, who motivated me to get involved with the national efforts in blended learning. So because of that, I would like to dedicate this to him as well. And also then my PhD professors at TU Delft, Professor Hensol and Professor Shantha. So I would like to dedicate this to them as well. And finally, to my parents, my late father and mother, who is now suffering from dementia. First, I would like to dedicate to them for all the things that they have provided amidst a lot of financial difficulties, but they have brought me to this level. Right. Okay, so let me start on my session and let me share the screen. So my topic today is blending the blended learning with cybersecurity. So it's the 15th inaugural lecture. So when this particular title is looked at, we will see, as Professor has also mentioned. So there are two things that seems to be not fitting that well, according to what many would believe. So my agenda would be, so first I will describe why this twofold research motivation, as it was already mentioned. Then I will just go through the cybersecurity research that I did, and then the e-learning research that I did. I use the word e-learning here because before coming to the blended learning, we have to touch on e-learning. Then, of course, COVID-19 and the aftermath. And I would like to touch on recent proactive trends due to cybersecurity issues. I am not going to talk about the cybersecurity issues, but some of the proactive trends that we can see so that we can apply in our blended learning efforts. Then current trends of service integration in blended learning environments. And then, of course, there's a neglected side when it comes to e-learning. So when we come to the security of blended learning environments. So that's the neglected side. So then in order to blend these two worlds, what should we do? So already some efforts have been taken, but of course I would like to draw your attention to this and finally the conclusions. Right. So the question is, okay, so we have cybersecurity on one side, blended learning on the other side. So what is the relationship? Now many people would believe, in fact, even when the internet was first started, so no one thought that there would be such a huge amount of attacks on the internet, because the main purpose, even though it started with some kind of military background, the popularity of internet was among the academics. So when we do some academic sessions, when we share certain things, will people be really targeting that? Because we are just sharing things for the betterment of the people. But of course, I think there was a good evidence for that even just before the event today. Right? So when we were just about to start, before starting, I think accidentally, so when someone requested the host privilege, that was clicked, and then someone did something that was nasty. So we can see academics or the educational institutes are not excluded. So the cybersecurity on one side, then the learning on the other side. Why? So if I give a brief background to the twofold research motivation, all the certain things to mention. So if we go back to the good old days, so if you look at the status of the internet in Sri Lanka in 90s, I passed out in 93 as was mentioned, and then I worked with him for about 7 years in the industry. So those days we were focusing on, one is the low bandwidth network. I can remember the very first online internet connection to Sri Lanka was 64K, and then after that 128K. So when we look at those speeds today, we will laugh at them. But of course, that was the status. So even the modems that we had, I can remember, they were 2,400 bps, bits per second. Right? But of course, even though it was low bandwidth, my intention or my vision was that we should get the full benefit from this. So even with low bandwidth networking that was available, what can we do? I can remember, several efforts that we had. Even once we planned to have the whole of Vidya LAN was connected to the fiber that was available at that time, just the 10 Mbps fiber. And then in our university, we had the very first fiber network cabling laid inside the university. But of course, when it goes out of the institution, it was very slow. So the very first connection was just the emails, just transferred up and down 2 times a day. But little by little, we got the internet, the World Wide Web was introduced, and then people started using it. Then, of course, we were simply using the normal text messages. But of course, as it was mentioned earlier, I focused on multimedia message distribution. And in fact, I had the privilege of communicating with some of the pioneers who defined some of the internet standards, which are called RFCs. I can remember two names, Nathaniel Bernstein and Ned Free, and then had some communication, because then that was the kind of the seed that was putting me to research on multimedia message distribution, even though we had this kind of resource constraints. Then, of course, together with that, to get the benefit, I was focusing on the proxy architectures, so that even though the connectivity is low, the low bandwidth, still how can we make use of that to achieve what we want? So, so various proxy architectures were researched and few papers were published. So I can consider that was the need of the hour at that time. And also, since I got the opportunity to work with ISPs in mid-90s, so that exposed to some of the IT security concerns. So at that time, people didn't talk very much about the cyber security as such, but people were concerned about the security within their infrastructure. But then, little by little, when they got exposed to the internet, the requirement for the security was coming up. So therefore, I worked with some of the senior academics. Suppose Yandas was one of them, and then there were several other academics, and also there were some of my colleagues. So the network and protocol security research, and then information security research. So those two things. One is the infrastructure side, the networking side. The other one is the information side. Of course, one may argue that okay, those two can't be clearly separated out. But those days when we did the research, we looked at them separately. Now, of course, everything is sort of merged together. Then, of course, with the dawn of the new millennium, there were several changes taking place, and also I switched my industrial career to the academic career. So after serving in the industrial sector for 7 years, at that time I observed two things. So one is the emerging use of e-learning among many top-ranked universities, and also in the corporate sector. I had the privilege of visiting some of the universities. One was the University of Oregon in the USA, and also the University of East London. And also in 90s, I had the opportunity to visit Japan for the training program, and then there I could visit some of the universities. But of course, they were not very much focusing on the e-learning side. But of course, the other two universities that I mentioned, so they were starting up e-learning services within their universities. So little by little, when I started researching on it, I also was fascinated with M-learning. The mobile environment was introduced to Sri Lanka. I can remember the very first mobile service provider here in '94. So when Celtel was introduced, and then little by little, the mobile technology got spread out. And then, of course, in the new millennium, we could see how M-learning was emerging. Of course, in the European continent, M-learning was spreading somewhat. But of course, when we look at the rural areas, the benefit of M-learning was felt. So the last decade, towards the latter part of the last decade, I was focusing on that as well. Then, of course, the increased threat landscape in cybersecurity. So that was observed. It was there towards the latter part of 90s as well, but it could be seen very much aggressively coming up towards the beginning of the millennium. And when it came to year 2002, 2003, we could see certain escalations of security incidents. And then, of course, I had the opportunity of meeting some of the colleagues who worked for some CERTs or computer emergency. At that time, we called them computer emergency response teams. Now, of course, we call them computer emergency readiness teams. And then certain other security efforts that were there. So this was in the year 2003, year 2004. So that, of course, so this cyber security threat landscape, the increase in the threat landscape motivated me to research further on it. So therefore, the information system security, the distributed firewall, because we felt that the traditional form of firewalls are no longer sufficient. The phishing attacks were coming up, and then the need for digital forensics came up, and that's where then I thought of getting into forensics as well, and then little by little we saw the cloud coming in, and then therefore cloud forensics as well. So these two things are slightly different, and then together with few other colleagues, again Prof. Gihandas was there, and then Prof. Chandana Gamage was there, and then there were several other industry experts as well. So we thought that we should pioneer search in Sri Lanka, complete emergency readiness teams. And in fact, in order to support this, we started some MSc research work where we could first research onto the operational side and the research side of search, and then get into that. So it was not just some kind of a industrial oriented endeavor. Yes, it had that nature, but it also was a research oriented endeavor. So when I look at those two backgrounds from my research interests, that's where the cyber security research and the e-learning research both were my fascinated areas. So it's basically, it was a kind of a natural motivation. So the circumstances drove me into that. So that's how I got into those two areas. So if I just look at a little bit onto the cybersecurity research, my journey through that, there are several specific aspects that I would like to draw the attention to come to the conclusions of this point. That's how I have arranged my, I would say, the line of argument, right? So if you look at the information systems security, at that time it was mostly related to the corporate sector, because the dependence on the information systems has been increasing exponentially. It was not a linear increase, it was an exponential increase. And even in Sri Lanka, we could see that. For an example, the many banks started introducing information systems to their banking operations. I can remember the Sampat Bank was the very first bank to start as a digital bank. And then, of course, the other banks also little by little got into that. And in fact, today we cannot see a single bank which is not enabled through IT. In fact, the bank cannot survive. So it is not only the banks, several other businesses got into this. So the security became a vital aspect or a critical aspect for business applications. So because of that, so there were demands for the research. It is not just because we want to research, there was a demand for the research. So the network security research was needed, the secure protocols, the firewalls. So it is not just setting up the firewalls, there is research work into the firewalls. The operating system security, the server-side security, system administration security. And in fact, as a result of this, several postgraduate courses also were designed and introduced in our MSc courses. And there were several MSc researchers who started working on it. So most of these research was the research work was carried out as part of the MScs, MPhils, PhD programs, etc. And of course, I also had the privilege of working with the University of East London during the time period of 2004 to 2006. There were several research collaborators in that university, and in fact, we had some journal publications as well. But more than that, the research collaboration that we had opened up several avenues. So we were most looking at the system administration related to security and the way that we can handle the attacks that were going beyond the scope of the capacity of the system administrators. So those were some of the research that we carried out. We looked at several case studies. Then, of course, as I mentioned, we had this security research team formation on the search. So that was as part of the cybersecurity research. As I mentioned earlier, the foundation was laid during late 90s when working with ISPs, but we saw an exponential growth of the use of the internet even in Sri Lanka. And the information systems used by the corporate sector in Sri Lanka motivated us to get involved with the cybersecurity research, specifically on the proactive security measures, which required a lot of research input. So if it is the earlier form of search was reactive. When something happens, we investigate why it happened, and then we look for evidence, and then come up, we say time traversal to the past, and then we say digital crime scene reconstruction process. So that's the kind of forensic aspect. But rather than getting into that, in fact, that is also needed. We did research on that as well. But the proactive measures, how can we figure out before something happens? So this led to research on certain models that would enable us to do that, rather than going with the traditional kind of CERTs, complete emergency response teams, to have complete emergency readiness teams. In fact, this term readiness, if I remember right, we were the first to use it, even though now in the world we can see that it is being used. They have been using it since 2003, 2004. And then, of course, we can see many other CERTs also use the term readiness. So, because of that, few of us got together, a group of security experts, including academics, and then we started pioneering CERTs. So, there were two CERTs that we could start up. So, one was Sri Lanka CERT, which was considered to be a coordination center. We call it CERT CC. But of course, prior to that, we started TechCert as well. With both, I was involved. SLCert was under the ICPA at that time, and then TechCert as a collaboration between the Department of academics of the Department of Computer Science and Engineering and the State Domain Registry. And that was more towards looking at the research and operational side. So this practice definition required the engagement of the CERTs not only in the operations, so it also required research endeavors. So some of these research were targeted at internal security products which were required for their own operations. So certain products had to be developed using some research inputs, and there was certain other research that led to various MSc-based research, and then publications and concept development. Then, of course, we observed. So this is a kind of a process of evolution, or a kind of it was an evolution that was happening, right? The volume of phishing attacks were on the rise. So it is not only the corporate sector, even our own university, University of Molecular, also was constantly targeted using phishing attempts. Even today, we can see that. Now, some of the technical things many of the other staff members may not notice, and they are not sometimes publicized. So one incident I can remember, even some of the vulnerabilities of our own Moodle learning management system was once exploited for the purpose of phishing. So they have used what is called an HTML injection attack, and then they have appended several phishing URLs to the end of the login page of the system. So we had to rectify it. So this was the kind of a experience that we have been going through. So because of that, we were forced to do research on these aspects. So first we were doing at things like log analysis based phishing prediction at that time, and that was possible during that time. And there was a product also called Fishhawk, looking at. In fact, I was not the one who did it. There were some other researchers. So we were basically looking at the log analysis or the event analysis based phishing prediction. So there were some tools developed as well. But of course, if you look at today's environment, this is not sufficient. So the use of AI, use of machine learning, and then detecting phishing before something happens. So today, in fact, there's one research PhD researcher who is finishing his research. He is yet to defend, but of course, thesis and everything is done. So he looked at several AI concepts in mitigating the phishing attacks. So that's where we are heading. Then, of course, all of us know that the cloud has been getting popular. So even many of our systems will be moved into the clouds in near future, and already has begun. Many organizations, many industries, they are already moving their systems to the cloud. So sometimes there are specific services developed for their own purpose, or else sometimes the well-known cloud services. But when it comes to clouds, the cloud security is a debated topic. In fact, there are various ideas about them. There are various research endeavors. Some research work is conflicting with each other as well. I mean, the concept-wise. So there are differences in opinions. But however, that itself implies that we have to do more research on it. So one area that I focused was the cloud-based firewalls and the multi-application security and the governance and control as MS research work. But these are some of the demanding areas whenever the industrial sector moves into the cloud. Then, of course, even in the cloud, there can be incidents happening. There can be frauds, there can be attacks, there can be security issues. So obviously, we need the forensic investigations in the clouds. But the problem is, cloud forensics is different from the traditional computer forensics. There are several constraints. There are certain areas that we cannot touch. So we have to manage based on what is available while adhering to the requirements of the legal system. Because whenever it is a forensic report, that also has to be admitted by a court if it is a case that is going on. And then whether the evidence is acceptable or not is a concern. Now, there are certain recommended practices that we follow whenever it is the traditional form of computer forensics. Now, some of those accepted practices cannot be applied in the same way when it comes to cloud forensics. So, because of that, how this could be done is looked at. In fact, now there's another MPhil candidate who is about to defend his concept. But this is a kind of a dynamically changing field. So we will have to continue to carry out our research on that. So then, when I look at my journey through e-learning research, first of all, I would like to give my definition of e-learning. So there are a lot of definitions in the world. So the way I have defined it is electronically facilitated, enhanced, and managed learning. So it is facilitated through electronic means. So it can be any kind of a technology that is in the form of e-form. Right? So that's why we call it e-learning. And it has to be definitely enhanced. If it doesn't enhance our the normal or the traditional learning environment, then there's no point in it. So it has to enhance. And managed. Now, someone may argue, okay, so everything is there in the internet. So anybody can go and learn. Yes, people can learn. But learning process is a managed process. You can't go in whatever direction that you want. You should have some kind of a target, and there is a way of assessment, and then you have to achieve that target. So any learning process is a managed process. So someone may discipline oneself in order to do that. But of course, when it is done in an institution, there has to be the management aspect, managing aspect got into that. Now, since I have mentioned that a blended learning, which is my main aspect, now what is it? So I would define that as a mix of e-learning and physical learning in appropriate portions. Now, what is this appropriate portion? That is, of course, a kind of a case-by-case thing that we have to decide. Because certain courses may require certain educational activities may require a higher amount of physical activities. Some may require lesser amount of physical activities. But it is not only the academic activities that we look at as the physical activities here. There's a whole heap of other psychological, emotional, and collaborative and various aspects that need to come into the learning process. And because of that, now some people may argue that, okay, the fully virtual learning also can give a lot of things. Yes, it can. I will not argue against it. But if we specifically look at what is referred to as the university education, holistic education, that need a mix of all these things. We can maximize the benefit of our physical learning through e-learning. So that's what I have been believing, and believing in a sense, not a blind belief, but of course through the research that I have found that of course e-learning facilitates that. So that is my current opinion. Of course, with the time, the things can change. We don't know. I would not like to say that I will stick to these ideas forever. Right? So as the things move on, there can be various other things that may come up, and we may change our perceptions. Right? So if you look at the initial research and development efforts, if we look at our own department, in fact, Professor Gyan has mentioned that in his introduction. So we came up with a system called LearnOrg at Computer Science and Engineering at University of Moratua. So that was started as an undergraduate project in 2001, and first used at the Department of CS in 2002, and then we extended it to multiple departments, in fact 3 departments, electrical and electronics, and then it was extended to the faculty, and with the 2006 intake of the undergraduates, it became a kind of a formal system within the faculty. But of course, that also required an architectural revamp. The earlier system was not scalable enough, so we had to redesign the system. So whenever we got into this research and development work, so it is both research and development happened inside the university. Originally, we were using MSc and MPhil students, and later we had the formal recruitments to the cadre positions. And then now they are part of the Center for IT Services, CITES. So we looked at things like standards, the integration, use of common platform, and use of open source, and also most importantly, what is called the extensible architecture. And that's why we started these in way back in 2002, and even today they can be used. And it can go through various modifications. So that is because one major thing that I focused on, even at the inception, was the scalability, extensibility. So that is very important, because otherwise we will get stuck. Of course, due to some manpower issues and resource constraints, certain things, of course, are not yet done. The functionality-wise, yes, it is there. Interface-wise, we have to do a lot more. That is not because it cannot be done. That is because we have the resource constraints, right? But of course, the ability to extend it to whatever we want is built into that. So these are some of the screenshots. I don't know whether people remember. Some of you who are here can probably remember. What is on the right-hand side is the very first one that we had, right? And then what is in the middle is the second one. Of course, that part was done with some sponsorship from Dialog as well. And then what is on the left-hand side is the current version that we have. So which has a lot of functionalities. Interface-wise, you might think the early ones are better, but of course the thing is, when we expanded it, we had certain things that needed to be included. So the interface design has to be done, but of course, as a system, all the required functionalities are there. So this is a kind of the evolution. So what you can see on the right-hand side is the one that actually the students came up with, and then later modified using some of the MSc students. And then, of course, when we had the second version, what is in the middle, we had certain recruited people as well, and then there was some funding available as well. And then what is on the left-hand side is what we have today, which is under continuous development. Right. So then, in the meantime, I also had the opportunity to do my research at Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands during the time 2004 to 2010. So then the focus was on what is at that time the novel concept of learning objects. So now, of course, it is a kind of established concept. At that time, people were just beginning to think about it. So then, how the courses could be designed using these learning objects. Now, today, of course, this concept is not widely seen because it is integrated into the systems. So people don't have to worry about it. But of course, that's the way the things are handled. So there are several standards like common cartridge, SCORM, and all those things are there. So my focus was on designing learning objects for adaptive learning environments. When the learning environments need to adapt to the changes that are taking place. But of course, the case studies that I conducted were in the blended learning environment. So where a lot of things were happening physically as well as electronically. So the research outcomes were 3 models that I came with, which were proved using case studies and the implementations. So one was learning objects evaluation model, that's for the purpose of building the courses, then the IT competency estimation model for the purpose of human resources and the skills. And the third one, the extended e-learning maturity model, which is to measure the status of a particular educational institute with respect to e-learning. Of course, why it is called extended e-learning maturity model is that by that time, the learning maturity model was already there. So which was developed by the US Navy for their own purpose. And then, so this was a kind of a complete revamping and extension to that. In fact, not only an extension, there were several other aspects brought into that. So in this extended e-learning maturity model, I looked at two aspects. One is the e-learning maturity, the other one is the IT infrastructure maturity. Of course, many people questioned me at that time. So what is the combination of these two? So e-learning maturity they understood. So we looked at learner administration, learner participation, content development, adaptive improvement, and organizational drive. These are the kind of 5 levels that were defined. Now in a maturity model, we define certain levels. So that's how we measure it. So the initial stage an institution may come to level 1. In fact, even though this is given in very abstract form here, so they have various matrices and various parameters that need to be measured. It's a very extensive process. Then, of course, the IT infrastructure maturity, which I defined as IT alignment of a university at that time. So, in this IT infrastructure maturity, I looked at the internal network status, global network, because the connectivity should be there. At that time, inter-university systems also were coming up. Then the capacity of the system that we have. Then, of course, the 4th and the 5th levels, you can see, this is where a lot of arguments came up. Even in my defense, I had to defend it. One is the security and the confidentiality, the reliability and the availability factors. So they were considered as alien to the e-learning side. But then my argument was no, when we look at the way it is going on and the way we are heading, and if you look at the future, those are very essential. In fact, so this was way back in 2008, 2009. But today we can see, so that prediction has become true, and therefore we have to focus on it. And in fact, my whole purpose of today's session is also that. Then, of course, there was another milestone. So that was the DEM project, Distance Education Modernization Project. So I would consider that as a national milestone. So there was some. Now, this was not only just a project. We did several research because there were several academics from various places, various universities in Sri Lanka as well as foreign universities. So when we did some research, we found out that the blended learning was more successful than the fully virtual learning in our context, specifically in the South Asian context, African context, and the Latin American context. And we were mostly doing the case studies in our context. So there were several things. So it was more than technology challenges, different forms of learner interactions were the emphasis, and also the cultural concerns. And then we could observe the completion rates related studies. So we saw that when it is fully virtual, there's a very kind of adverse kind of a drop, a drastic drop in the completion rates. It may start with huge numbers, but when it comes to completion, it may be quite less. Whereas in the physical education, the completion rates are comparatively better. But of course, what we found out was when it's blended learning, even in the physical education with e-learning facilitation, it becomes a higher completion rate. So we had some results, and then we had some publications as well. And anyway, for some courses, the physical interactions are necessary. So this motivated us to establish blended learning environments in many academic institutions in Sri Lanka, both state sector universities and the private sector education institutes. However, in this particular project, so if the project has particular project focus, even though we as academics, we were focusing on the research side, the project required us to mostly focus on the course development and content and the pedagogy and training the online tutors. So that was the official focus of the project, even though we engaged in research. Then, of course, the M-learning was coming up. In fact, I got motivated towards this during my sabbatical. So I spent my sabbatical at Rajadhara University of Sri Lanka, and also I did some work with Open University. So one thing that we looked at was specifically if we are to take this to the working community, specifically the rural community, farmers, carpenters, and other people who had their vocations in a small scale. So we felt that learning seems to be a kind of a good tool for that. So basically to educate the bottom of the pyramid community. So when it comes to income levels, we could see that even though they had some skills, there have not been any improvement, and then there is no way of educating them. And of course, they were not motivated to have education as well. So there was a very nice research done on this. We focus on something called stealth mode push concept in a kind of a hidden way, or without letting them know that we are educating them, how to educate them. So we tried this with some farmer community. So as a result of an in-field research, we could come up with what's called ubiquitous learning environment. That means why we call it ubiquitous is it can just move with all the people wherever they go. Basically attached with them learning. And then the other thing was the learning personalization, because different people want to learn in their own way. So for this matter, how we can combine several types of systems together, including the mobile learning, and then how the individual learning can be facilitated. In fact, that was done by, again, a student from the other university who passed out from there, and then did this research in the Open University. So the M-learning was used as the target, the M-learning was used because the target population required the actual engagement in their vocational activities. So therefore, this was essentially blended learning because they are physically doing certain on-the-job training kind of a thing. Then, of course, we had this COVID-19. So if you look at this COVID-19 and the aftermath, and it was already mentioned that on a positive note, we can say the University of Moscow was COVID-19 ready even well before the pandemic started. Why? So we had the several things are mentioned here. The centralized authentication was there, integration of applications through the single sign-on. So single sign-on was achieved through the centralized authentication. And then the systems, we had several systems, LearnOrg and Moodle and BA, document management systems, the Wi-Fi facilities, email facilities, the website where the authentication was necessary for certain content updates. So that was there. And then the scalability to add more services. So we could integrate Zoom with it, we could integrate Turnitin with it, we could integrate what is called Big Blue button. So that's also something with Zoom. And there were several other things, right? And then we also could automate some of the examination related processes, some of the undergraduate studies division related processes, faculty of graduate studies related processes, and also to enable the researchers to do a lot of work during this COVID-19 time, the virtualization based services for them to carry out their research. So that could be facilitated. So therefore, even though COVID-19 was there, the University of Moscow could function at its full scale. However, there were some negative sides as well, right? So due to some of the practical reasons, which is closely associated with COVID-19, it also led to a situation of moving away from the blended mode to a fully virtual mode. So some of the courses were fully virtual. Now, if that could be done, I am not saying anything against it, but on the other hand, there were several repercussions. So we need to be aware of them. So one is, since it is a kind of a holistic education that we provide at the university, some of the students of the real university environment that we need to understand. Then, of course, some of the students were not really learning. So they just sometimes start the Zoom session and they may move away. We can't see their feelings and things like that. We can ask them to keep the videos on, but even then, some people may say due to their bandwidth issues and all that, they may get disconnected and all that would be there. Of course, we can use it for whatever the purposes, even while we are physically in the university, we can use the virtual modes, but at the same time, having certain physical interactions also would be necessary. But one thing that we saw was the attitude issues. So sometimes, the motivation was, just to be there than learning, and also the teamwork and collaborations and all those things were also affected. But of course, what I found was, if we put an extra effort to motivate, so we can see a kind of a motivated collaboration. Because in learning, collaboration is very important, motivation is very important, and also the feedback regarding their learning and feedback for us as the lecturers. So that will lead to the continuous improvement. As you can see, in fact, this is a course that is conducted this year in 2023. You can see just within a month, within 1 week, so 11th March to 17th or 18th March, the number of posts happening within a group of 5 or 6 members. In one group, I have arranged it according to the number of replies. You can see 86 replies in 156, 52, 51, etc. Right? So that is because they were engaged in a particular task that fascinated them, because this was a kind of a hot topic on surveillance and in information systems. And they also had the practical reasons. So in their industries and wherever. So even though some of these people were not physically in the university, they were in the working places. So these were some of the postgraduate students. So it's very important that we look into these aspects as well. So because of that, there's another research that is going on. I'm collaborating with QUT in Australia. So I have a PhD student there. So I'm only a co-supervisor. There's a supervisor from that end as well. So we are looking at the social presence and the well-being aspect in a collaborative learning environment. So there are a lot of things, a lot of parameters. This is not the time to explore all of them. There's a huge set of parameters where the relationships can be drawn in various different ways. And there are differences in opinion among various researchers as well. So we have to grapple with it. We are still doing that research. So, so that is an avenue that we are moving forward. Then we look at the recent proactive trends due to cybersecurity issues. We can see specifically in the industrial sector. So that's why I have given the title for the slide, heading for the slide, remedial measures either by the industry or for the industry. So one that we can see is the accreditation. For an example, standards like ISO 27001, which is commonly known as ISMS or Information Security Management Systems, right? Or else ITIL, IT Infrastructure Library, or ISO 20000. In fact, those two are slightly two different things, but quite similar. ISO 20000 set the service management side. And then things like PCI DSS for the financial institutions and the banks, payment card industry, data security standard, or else the CMMs, capability maturity models. Now earlier, what I mentioned as the learning maturity model or extended e-learning maturity model is a form of a CMM. And also things like now for the banks in Sri Lanka, for an example, we have what's called the base security standard by Central Bank of Sri Lanka. So these are part of the accreditation processes. And if a particular industry does not adhere to that, they may not be able to operate, or they may not be given the license, or they may not be allowed to engage in certain types of business activities. And also we can see today things like when it comes to industrial sector, the code verifications, reviews. For an example, even in Sri Lanka, online banking apps, unless they do a code review, they are not able to launch it, because there can be a lot of avenues of attacks. If the controls are not there, if the controls are not clear, a lot of things can happen in the same way that something happened just before the start of the session today. So that is because of the controlling aspect, the clear controlling, knowing what is happening. And also we can see the laws and regulations. So one is, of course, this has been a hot topic in the past as well. Internationally, we can see GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, specifically when we are dealing with the European community. The adherence expected from the system's implementations, and then what is allowed and what is not allowed, how data is to be safeguarded, who can give what, who can process what, So there are several things. And in fact, many of our software companies who are producing software for the European market also had to revamp their whole development process to comply with it. And also, even locally, we can see several things are there. Computer Crime Act is there, Personal Data Protection Act, E-Transactions Act, and Cybersecurity Bill, which may become an act in the near future. And in fact, Computer Crime Act and the E-Transactions Act, so they were enacted somewhere in 2006 and 2007, and Personal Data Protection Act last year. So these acts also have certain requirements expected from the people who process or own data. So, for example, Personal Data Protection Act talks about processors and the owners and the controllers, in fact, right? The controllers and the processors. So there are certain expectations, legal expectations as well. Now, so many industries will have to follow this. Now, if you look at even the blended learning environment, there are certain trends that we can see today. So when we look at the way the world, the universities in the world are heading forward, so a lot of blended learning environments have several integrated services. Now, if you look at a few years back, we had things like source platform import export kind of facilities. We could export or import course contents, assessments, exams, etc. But of course, going beyond that, then later we saw certain developments like centralized authentications or single sign-on, certain automated processors, module systems with plugins. We can have a kind of system that will be enhanced with several plugins as the time passes by. But of course, then we can see recent moves where the integration of various other systems and cloud services can be seen. For an example, the Zoom is now integrated into Moodle. If you take a platform like Blackboard, an e-learning, popular e-learning platform, but it's for the collaborate, for online collaborations, etc., and then video-based lectures and all that. And then Turnitin. So these kind of other systems can be integrated together. And also things like transcripts and the certificates, where the remote verifications are necessary. Are they using QR code or the PKI-based digital certificates and various other means, whatever is acceptable. So the remote verifications are becoming essential. And also the things like online payments. Now we can see the things are getting more and more business critical. So even the educational systems are now coming to the state that the industrial sector or the financial sector, or rather the banks or stock market or whatever, right? So where they are today. So if you are coming into that, the criticality can be higher. Right? So therefore, so if you look at the neglected side in e-learning is the security side. So in the blended learning environments. So one is the security issues in the integrated system development that we see. Now the thing is, unlike in some of the other industries like banks, etc., there are no huge changes expected day by day. Whereas when it comes to learning environments and also various other environments, we can see a lot of rapid changes are to be expected, many additions day by day. And then there are a lot of bottom-up requirements. That means not only from the top management, people who are in the operational level, there are a lot of requirements that are coming. But the thing is, if you look at these, now the bottom-up requirements, they do not consider security when it is escalated. And then even the developers, we can see that the security knowledge is not up to the standard. And then there are a lot of interface-related security issues, which is common for any kind of a application. And then when we integrate several other services together, there are service integration-related security issues. So these things need to be addressed. Right? So any integrated system environment discussed earlier in my earlier slides, so that will demand an adequate security level to meet today's cybersecurity threat landscape. So we on one side we have the cybersecurity threats, on the other side we have the evolution of the systems. The day by day things are getting added up, and then because of this, each and every development process needs to include a security assessment. So that has to be integrated into the process. So that is something that is lacking today. So we are trying to do that as far as possible even in our development in the university. But of course, that needs a lot of resources, right? Now, why it is difficult to achieve is there are security issues due to what I would say as prioritization issues. So what are these prioritization issues? I can observe this in many academic institutions. One is many universities do not seem to understand the critical nature of their business, whereas some other business like banks, manufacturing, they do understand it. Whereas here, the critical nature is not very much understood. Sometimes even the dependence or even the survival of the universities are on e-learning systems and the integrated services. Some universities, of course, do understand, but many universities seems not to understand that they are dependent on it. And also there are certain other security requirements which are not properly addressed. For example, exam results, academic procedures, transcripts, payments. So they heavily depend on security. So we have to give priority to addressing the security in these. And then the reliability and the service confirmation. So that is not seriously looked at. Right? So whenever it comes to the redundancy or the availability aspects or the disaster recovery aspects. So sometimes the reason is the funding is not available. Sometimes the reason is that even if the funding is available, the priority is not given. Of course, if you look at a bank or a manufacturing organization, if they don't do that, they know that they can't survive. But the thing is, sometimes we also don't understand, if we don't do that, even we may not be able to survive. So what will happen if the systems are down today, right? And the other issue is the human resources are not adequate. So system administrators and these are the technical staff, they are not adequately recruited. So these are some of the things that we observe. So these issues need to be resolved for us to have a good blended learning environment. Right. So because of that, what can we do? So if we are to blend the two worlds, so there's the institutional responsibility of the academic institutions. So one I would say is the accreditation schemes for blended learning environments. So that's very much important. So if we are to overcome the indicated issues, there should be a systems accreditation scheme for educational institutes. And I am predicting that it will soon become mandatory. In the same way that it has become mandatory in many other sectors, this will become mandatory. So we can see that this has happened with the banks, this has happened with the capital markets, this has happened with the health services in many countries, even though it is not here still in Sri Lanka. In the manufacturing sector that has happened, and there are many other sectors. In fact, it's a legal requirement. It is defined as due diligence by the management. However, we can see on the positive note, some universities have already taken necessary steps. In case this becomes mandatory, they are able to face that as well. So I do expect that in the same way that we were ready for COVID-19, at the time that this becomes mandatory, specifically if we have the vision of becoming a world-class university, then to compete or to be in par with the other universities, we need to have these things in place so that we will be able to always claim that our environment is trustworthy, reliable, and then it is accredited. Now, if I just go back to my PhD research again, the extended e-learning Manchester model. So there I said that there are the level 4 and the level 5. The focus is on security and confidentiality and the reliability and the availability. Even if that model is not applied, still we have standards such as ISMS or ITIL, which can be applied. In fact, many organizations, they apply these standards to claim that they are up to the mark in the information systems. So if you have this kind of accreditation process, now we know that the accreditation is there for our programs, our learning outcomes, our syllabus, the way we conduct our educational processes. But of course, when we look at even in that accreditation, they simply look at, okay, whether some e-learning or systems are there only, whether they are in the proper state is not looked at. So therefore, this needs to be addressed appropriately. So therefore, in conclusion, what I would like to say is that now a blended learning environment will be essential for a university to survive. Now, when I said this, a few years back, people laughed at me. But of course, today it is becoming a reality that this will be necessary for the university to survive. Students will not consider coming into a university that doesn't have blended learning. Right? If it is only traditional, no one will come. Right? And we are talking about not only the Sri Lankan university, even the foreign students, and even Sri Lankan students. They will come only if this is there. So they will always look at the status of the university with respect to the blended learning. However, then the other aspect, ensuring the readiness to face cybersecurity challenges will be essential for the blended learning environment to survive. So the blended learning environment will not survive if we don't take into account the cybersecurity challenges. So blended learning is required to survive as an academic institution, but for that blended learning to survive, the security needs to be looked at. So therefore, it's a kind of a chain effect, or it's a kind of a chicken and egg situation as well. So both need to be there. So with that note, I would like to wrap up my session. And thank you to all of you. Thanks for all of you who listened, students, industry, academics, and everyone, and also the people who are here in this room. And I would like to thank Vice Chancellor and the Dean, Faculty of Graduate Studies, for inviting me to do this presentation. And thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shantha Fernando, for sharing your expertise with us today. Your insights and experiences on blending the blended learning with cybersecurity, which is both timely and relevant in today's rapidly evolving digital landscape, were truly enlightening. And also, we are grateful for your contribution to our inaugural lecture series. Now I would like to invite Professor Ruan Gopura, Director, Office of Research, to hand over the token of appreciation, a memento of the event, to our speaker. Thank you. And now I would like to extend our thanks to our sponsors of this event. Cargill's, the event sponsor, Delhi FT, our print media sponsor, and our social media sponsor, Sri Lankan Scientist. Finally, thank you to all of you for joining and making this event a success. Have a good evening.